to get it like an option to name the track and stuff. And it's not. Anyway, good morning. Okay, so we've cleared through our big anatomy concepts, our overview stuff, and we have cruised through some of the big pieces of the professionalism questions. And so we've got a little bit more like flexible, fluid conversation style for the rest of the class. Some like big concepts to hit, but a little bit more like dialing that information all down and getting it kind of more locked in, yeah. So today we have a conversation with the idea of massage as art and science. And I have some ideas about that, and I'm sure you do too. So let's settle into the body. Jump in here. Oh, it's going to be loud. And get those breaths going. Find our body parts, listen in. And let's just sweep through the systems a bit. Just find your skeletal system. Listen in for any big pieces of information that your bones are trying to give you right now. Listen into the muscular system, the shape of your structure, and the way that it's held together. Let that lift you up. Listen into your circulation. Find that heartbeat. Follow it out through the arteries. Back up through the veins. Find your nervous system. The quick routes of information conducting in and out from your central nervous system into your peripheral nervous system. Find your endocrine system. Any sensations of hormonal shifts in the body or emotions. Just accept and love it all. Find your integumentary system. Feel the condition of your skin. Digestive system. Awareness of that directionality, that provision. Sit with the body, integrating that awareness of systems for a few moments. Let that wave of energy roll through with the breath from the feet into the knees, into the hips, into the shoulders, cresting at the crown and dropping back down. Shoulders, elbows, wrists, tips of the fingers. And let's just lock that in with a few more breaths. And return to the surface of the skin. Join us back in the room. And here we are. Okay. So, hi. How's it going, Eva? Welcome.
Works my management of my hand.
Understood. We'll work around it as usual. Welcome, welcome.
As usual.
Not as, as usual on the island. Not targeted at, nothing personal at all. We all can have our moments. When there's only one lane roads going many directions from where you need to be, I get it. There's only so much you can control. So we settled into the body a little bit, and I'm gonna let you settle in as well for a moment. So I'll just get going. But today we're really hitting onto the intersection of sort of the art and science of bodywork practice and how that overlaps. And I actually personally pop it out a little bigger than that, but let's kind of cruise through just that contrast for a little bit, and then we'll expand on that. So the first term that comes up that we probably need to synchronize our individual ideas of what this means in order to have a useful conversation is the idea of intuition. So when we talk about intuition, there are lots of different concepts. Let's get some of them out there, and then we'll narrow down what we actually are going to be meaning as we approach this material today. Sound good? I'm going to find a colorful marker. You guys let me know what you're thinking about intuition.
Well, in the respective massage, it's like knowing where to go on the person's body. Without really knowing in your head, but your hands know where to go. Instinct.
To go. Instinct. Love it. And I like that. Your hands.
Your hands know where to go. It's not your head. It's like your body knows this body and where it needs you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
When someone shows up in your life that you know, whether you know them or not, knowing what they're feeling.
Feeling, reading feelings. Yes. Reading feelings. Empathy. All right. Let's see if we can pull in any of the more sciencey ideas that we already ran through, nervous system, endocrine system stuff. Any terms come to mind that you could associate with the idea of intuition here?
Well, my first instinct is smell.
Smell.
You get a lot of information.
Yes.
In the air and
scent.
Your pheromones,
Uh-huh.
those kinds of things. You can't really detect it with your mind, but it's like you know what's going on.
Yeah.
With your heart and soul.
I learned something super interesting this week. I was listening to a neuroscience podcast, and she just happened to kind of throw out as a side detail the idea that some, but not all, endocrine signals, chemicals, make it to the surface of our skin over the process of just the metabolism of our cells. Some migrate out. And like we would expect, although it's most likely subconscious most of the time, we would be able to kind of read those states on each other to some extent. And guess which ones she specifically mentioned?
I'm thinking fear, but...
Yeah, cortisol. Yeah.
Well, that'd be similar. Or,
She didn't mention adrenaline. I'm not going to, I won't go beyond what the neuroscientist was telling me, but she said cortisol.
else she might have mentioned.
Yeah. Okay. She gave us both of the major sex hormones.
Oh.
Which is? Oxytocin is an attachment hormone, but it's like universal across, right? But like there's the more female sex hormone and the more male sex hormone.
So
you guys got this. Estrogen.
Testosterone.
Yes, that's right. Estrogen. Yeah. But these are the ones that she brought up. I thought that was super interesting. Side note. So that kind of fluffed out an idea of what we might be able to detect on each other, especially like in the process of attraction and attachment there. That these are like kind of really big piece ideas of what we need to know about other people's chemical states. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. It's just kind of fun. Scent. All right.
Yeah.
On intuition, generally.
Like parasympathetic responses.
Uh-huh. Parasympathetic. Okay. That's a really long word to fit on the board. All right. So with this idea, I think you guys you're zooming in on it pretty fast, and especially this idea of the empathy in the broad sense of being able to detect what's happening on somebody else's system and then create like a mirror circuitry yourself to be feeding back and resonate on their emotions, respond to their emotions. Empathy doesn't always mean that we feel the same thing the other person is feeling, right? But it means that we pick up what the person is feeling and have an appropriate response to that. And so that allows us to really navigate more intuitively, to have our response to what they're doing make sense and be effective for them. This idea of the hands knowing also, I think, really sticks out as super important. And so how do you get to a place where your hands know?
Well, you have to trust.
Yeah.
You have to trust your instincts and let your hands do their job. You know, get your head out of the way.
Yes, head out of the way. Yeah. And let's try framing that like with our more sciencey language. What is getting your head out of the way?
Be in your body. More sciencey.
More sciencey.
Be in a mental in a state.
Yeah.
That is receptive and like your brainwaves. You know, you really want to.
Brainwaves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
State.
Allow your
brainwaves.
Your alternate state rather than so cognitive and
cognitive. Perfect, Karen. Cognitive. Okay, so we have a bunch of sets of neural networks that are switching in and out all the time, right? And based on what we're perceiving in our environment, we're going to pull up the operating system that applies to that environment historically. So this is really what our nervous system and endocrine system and their very special interface is for, what it's about, is to generate this ability to code switch and navigate all these different environments that we have as humans that we have to deal with, right? Because we're going to have really different patterns of behavior in the classroom situation versus when you're driving versus when you're parenting or with a lover or partner or like exploring a new location or whatever, you know. So we need to be able to access these by switching which neural network is functional at that moment, right? And so intuition is largely about being able to detect and operate your own neural network to slide into an effective way of responding to the environment, right? And this will happen super subconsciously, where like once you've really got the hang of driving, you don't have to spend all that much cognitive processing on anticipating whether the car in front of you is about to slow to a stop, or anticipating that the road is going to do the same thing it did the last time that you were driving on it. You can kind of build those curves into the hands, right? And so this is how the hands know. They actually completely depend on repetition to install these neural networks. And the more aware we are as we do the reps, the more that we can make conscious cognitive decisions early on, and then that installs into the hardware, where our hands are going to just repeat what we decided to do many times, right? For most people, it's going to take as few as 7, as many as like 30 reps of exactly the same thing, more or less, to make a subconscious program set that you can just access and navigate just based on that, not have to think about it anymore. There are a few like developmental things, like people with strong ADHD, it might take several more repetitions. And some really interesting data came out recently where they were showing that in children especially, that while they were hitting more or less like averages on like getting kids to integrate specific pieces of information to have ready access to, that it would take around like 20 times of exposure to get that to replicate smoothly when using like academic techniques. But that when they put it into a playful, imaginative space, 3 was enough. Wow. A lot of the time.
Big
yeah,
difference.
That's a huge difference. And so like that's, you know, one of the things that we really get to play around with of this like imaginative, like alpha brainwaves kind of experience that opens up the possibility of neural change to happen much faster than when we try to drive it from cognition, right? Okay, so that's like that frontal brain competition with everything else. But there's just so much more hardware available for processing in the body than there is in the conscious level of the prefrontal cortex, right? And I've said this before, but like I want it to kind of always drive home, is while we can probably operate pretty smoothly if we're in decent shape, 40 bits of information per second on the conscious level in the prefrontal cortex, the rest of the brain, the hindbrain and the central nervous system, is going to be processing like 40,000 bits per second. So if we can drop that program to be on the subconscious level, the subconscious can take much more efficient care of us than the conscious level can on predictable routine things. But consciousness, of course, is super important for when we hit novel situations, deciding who we're going to be, what neural network we're going to form in response to that. Okay, so that brings us down into this idea of mindfulness, which is essentially the ability to decide whether you're going to be in cognition or whether you're going to be in body level processing, and smoothly switching between, making sure that you are getting enough time in each different state. And our world right now is built in such a way that we can easily be stuck in cognitive mode for a hugely disproportionate amount of our day, and it's exhausting, and we're wrecked, and we're anxious, and we're like hurrying, and we're caught up in these little narratives and stories, because most of, even on a conscious level, most cognition is repetitive, right? Like, how many times in a day do you have a truly novel thought that wasn't already built into your hardware?
In the shower, is something new.
Yes.
Relaxed.
Which is super common in the shower. When you get that like full body stimulation, you're actually going to be crisscrossing, utilizing those neural networks a little bit more fluidly than the rest of the time. If you're like telling yourself a story about what somebody already did or said or how you should respond to that. And like most of our problematic cognition, right, is about intersocial problem solving. Yeah. And so when we're caught into that story and we're just like dynamically sucked into repeating and like building, which is a natural instinct to try to prepare for conflicts, for interactions and events that may have been, you know, like you didn't feel prepared for the last time it happened, right? So we want to revisit that, we want to rebuild. But the scale of intersocial problems that are presented to us is way beyond what our biology is really set up to handle, right? So like historically, we would have been in groups of people that were much smaller, and our interaction with people outside of our group would have been fairly infrequent. And that's like what's written in the code of our DNA at this point. Like we're well adapted to having like a family of 50, maybe a social network beyond that of like 200 people. And beyond that, just like on a pure processing level, we really struggle to meaningfully track beyond like 50 people of relative intimacy, 200 people of general knowledge, right? So we're like stuck in this cognitive strain trying to keep track of like anticipating all these different social dangers, which is like really the biggest issue for humans on this planet. Like we've been at the top of the food chain for a long ass time. Whatever is left over in our body about like run from a saber-toothed tiger, like it's actually had enough time to transmute genetically. Like we are not really getting that like adrenaline thrill off of predation fear. An echo of that, but most of our ancestors, most of the time that they ever mounted adrenaline and cortisol responses to danger, it was about people, right? So this whole piece of instinct weaving together intuition of like how the brain is working and how our social lives are working and how we are ourselves interfacing with the body is like a really big piece, and it's going to take you a long time to settle in where you feel like it moves super fluidly for you and that there's almost no cognition required in order to do the work of interfacing with people, both like verbally and also on a bodywork level, functioning with their body. But it will come because it's just repetition. It's just revisiting, making the decision and letting that decision stand. So like the idea of policy, like a decision you already made, is like 1,000 more decisions made in advance. And because those 40 bits that we're processing on a cognitive level are very precious to us, we want to not waste them, right? We want to let the decisions be already made instead of like wasting our dopamine on trying to build new neural networks that are like redundant or whatever. So that's where we go with that. Mindfulness is this navigation between states, going in and out of the mentalized state and the physical aware state, the sensory processing aspect of our lives, the acceptance and receptivity to reality as it happens instead of the imaginary reality that we are constructing all the time. Does that make sense? Any questions or comments there?
Well, it occurs to me that when we set up our treatment room, it's like getting on your yoga mat.
Yeah.
When you go to that place, it's like your body, oh, I remember this. I know what state of mind I want to be in. And when you light the incense, or you put the reeds in the scented oil or whatever, or you put the sheet on the table, it takes your mind to that place.
Absolutely. They're like sensory re-triggering, which we can do really deliberately. And this, like the idea of triggering has been really trashed in culture lately, right? But it's one of the most useful things that humans can do strategically to manage our own consciousness is to create a sensory association with the state that we want to feel. So the ones that accidentally got installed by somebody being an asshole to us, like that's unfortunate. It takes a lot of work to undo that. Unlearning is more costly on cognition than learning in the first place, right? But we also have like thousands of moments per day where we can decide what sensory system we want to set up and build a life around the mental states, the cognitive states, the physiological states that we want to occupy.
That reminds me of the veracity term that we learned in the last class, holding objective truths.
Yes, holding objective truths.
And like, if you're coming from a place of dealing with assholes all the time,
Yeah.
or like that's in your past and you've built up some kind of mechanism against that, that might not necessarily be pointing you in objective truth. It's like the truth of that situation.
Right, because that neural network is for predicting that situation.
Right.
And when we don't effectively switch to a new neural network when we're in a new situation, then we're going to be basically playing out like a parallel reality that's not referencing directly to the information that we're actively receiving from life, the planet, the universe, everything.
That won't be here now, but in the present moment.
Right,
Smells
right.
help with that a lot.
Yeah, it's super direct because that olfactory processing center is like right up against the amygdala and medulla. It's like very close to our really important emotional processing centers. And the idea of emotional processing is a whole other interesting bit, right? So we've got the nervous system, which is operating this like binary code of on, off, 10001111, right? But the information that it can store is complex because of the way that the pathways are laid out from one synapse, one neuron into the next, right? In addition to that, we have that like much slower endocrine system network. It's not slow, like it can happen fast. You've had a startle and you've like shot off adrenaline instantly, right? But whereas the nervous system could hypothetically just stop that signal once it's launched from the adrenal glands, like that's that. It's in your bloodstream now. Like you're gonna clean it somewhere else. Like you're gonna have to wait for it to get back to your liver or to break down in your bloodstream or to like somehow get adjusted by lymphocytes. So that gives us a lot of flexibility and a lot of like plasticity in the storage of information, in that like our body can basically respond to these hormonal sets, these like really unique combos of a little bit of cortisol, a little bit of estrogen, a little withholding some serotonin, a little activated dopamine. Now you're in love, right? So we can replicate that, we can recognize it, and it's gonna pull up our backstory from every other time that we got hit with that particular chemical soup. And that allows us to store a lot more intricate information than if we were only dependent on the neural network. So that's fun. All right. Inside of the idea of this art and science of bodywork concept, something that I want to get across is to kind of pop it out. This is a field where we have a lot more leeway to kind of play with like older wisdom, ancient knowledge, magical awareness and stuff. So I like to think of this as a practice, and this would apply to some other interventions and therapies as well, but that we have a butterfly of our practice, where we have the science is a leading wing, and craft. So this is craft is like craftsmanship, yeah? This is what we've already installed into our hardware in terms of our hands knowing what to do, our like apprenticeship, journeyman, mastery practice that takes us through the course of like really pulling the wisdom of what we have known scientifically and what we have experienced into our tissues, into that like active storage. Okay. And then sort of back wings of magic and art. So science, we have a pretty good grasp on the idea of what science is supposed to accomplish. It's supposed to ask questions. It's supposed to eliminate the pieces that just don't work, run the experimentation, and be able to let go of hypotheses and theories that just were not predicative of the outcomes that we got. Science is not super great at telling us for sure what is. That's like ideally not an objective of science in a certain way. Like science is a lot better at process of elimination. And then by the time it's just a very time consuming pathway to take in order to get to like objective truth. And it's good. It's super, super important to have the research process and to like be able to tell the difference between quality research and made up bullshit, right? But when we have science and craft integrated and balanced to each other, then we're going to be constantly adjusting our craftsmanship off of the science, but we're also going to be doing the craft in a somewhat scientific way, where we're gathering more information, we're integrating more information as we go. Behind science, we have magic, because where science leaves off of this like tiny bubble of what can be known about the universe from our standpoint in the course of human history and how much time we've been working on this, because we're like whatever, like kind of 300 years into like science proper. Yeah. Like we barely did this yet. And so when science leaves off, we still have the whole backstory of humanity, of like how we were figuring stuff out and what was more immediately available to us on an intuitive level to access as well. And like magic is not as crisp of an explanation as science, but it covers a lot more ground. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the art is really the creative element. Like the craft is going to be, you're going to have lots of people on the planet that more or less their practice resembles yours, but you're going to sometimes do something that's totally your own. And so that's the space to bring that in. And I think that like having these 4 concepts in balance really helps us navigate like creating those states in the first place. Allows us to choose like which wing are we leading with right now? Like how are we keeping them all rhythmically enough coordinated that we can get off the ground? You like that?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of fun. All right. Let's go into a little bit jumping down now that we've got that framework of like, of course we're going to be practicing based on intuitive and subconscious functions of our own experience in addition to the knowledge that we've acquired. But how do we go through the process of becoming as accurate as possible, really leaning into science, not letting any of the other wings off balance, are like one tool that's a little more crisp in like, how do you find the right way? Science is better at eliminating other options and helping us narrow down the actual best interface of how to do a treatment. So we've got, it wants us to talk about biological plausibility. This sounds complicated, but it's basically just the idea of once you have a grasp on what anatomy tends to do overall, then you get to start having the ability to kind of intuit what is likely to be going on. And so that might be mostly a cognitive process, especially early on. You might have, like low back pain where you're running through a list in your mind of what muscles are most likely to be responsible for that. But as that builds into your hands, then you'll be able to detect that on that more automated or subconscious, unconscious level, right? But the sense of, it's like the skill set, biological plausibility is the skill set of being able to rule out what's not a probable cause and zoom in, hone in on what you are most likely to get good effect with treating. And that's a very integrated science and art intersection there. So when we go into the need for science and the need for science in our practice, it really brings up some interesting balance bits of where we fit into the professional world right now. And we are in a category that's so cuspy. We're right on the edge of healthcare and personal service, and especially in Hawaii, that's kind of how the law is set up. We get shoved back in there. Some other states, you've been slid over closer into healthcare by now already, but we're still in that process. So building our professional credibility is still really important. As a group, we have a need to give each other the reality check of zooming back in on science and not tossing it out, because we tend to practice in a way that's relatively unsupervised. We tend to practice in a way that is extremely personalized, and we tend to be quite intuitive and empathetic, and leaning on these things is really good. It's exactly what's needed to get the kind of outcomes that we're showing, but it's extremely easy for people to kind of fall off the edge of the planet on making sense as well. And we do need to make sense. We need to not be more than necessary challenging what the medical system can understand about what we're doing. Does that make sense? Okay. So we have this kind of tentative relationship where it's really easy for us to get written off. And getting written off is a problem because we already know that the fundamental basis of why what we're doing works has a lot to do with the effect of expectation in the client and the relaxation that we're triggering that's not going to trigger if they can't trust us. And so we're in this trust building window of time. So building trust with our clients, with society at large, has to do with personal accountability and kind of collective professional accountability a lot. This is super important. So narrowing down our own tendencies and biases, being aware of them, is at the forefront of preventing ourselves from dropping into a uninformed, kind of ignorant way of practicing. Your biases are like a double-edged sword, of course, that people who resonate more with your general way of thinking are going to be really good clients for you. And so if you have a similar type of processing, that's not a problem, but it's easy to accidentally reinforce a way of looking at the world that is not reality referencing, that is, again, keeping us thrown into this cognitive state and not allowing us to use the actual sensory information that is coming to us from reality. So staying super in tune with how you make meaning, how you gather experience in your practice, and what you tend to think that information is going to turn out to mean, right? So we're always challenging ourselves on that way. And then we're also really inviting evidence and working towards evidence-based practice. We're keeping up with the research as it develops. We're asking our own questions, doing our own micro research, where like maybe we don't necessarily need to know like on a meta-analysis level whether this particular technique is the best for everyone, but you will have tiny questions of like, with this person who has a little bit more reactive nervous system, what kind of results do I get with this technique? And do I get the same results across on other bodies, or how much might that vary as I approach other clients? So the evidence-based practice is coming in both on our meta level of how we decide to practice in the first place, and on the very nitty-gritty moments of how we're making decisions with our clients on the day-to-day. And another really big piece that we have to keep in mind as we're staying self-aware and analytical about our biases, the meaning that we're tending to build, the hypotheses and theories that we're building off of our tiny micro experience, the idea of correlation and causation is at the forefront there. That we're going to see a lot of bits of information. We're going to perceive a lot of bits of information. But which information is meaningfully linked to other pieces of information is a question that you challenge yourself with constantly, that you're bringing forward. Like, I detected this, like trigger point active in this zone, and there's another phenomenon happening in the body. Why might that be related? If we limit ourselves to Western medicine, we're kind of screwed on this front. But if we go off the deep end on just like reinterpreting every composite effect of like, we learn some acupuncture points and some homeopathics and some aromatherapy, and we're just like using every different modality willy-nilly in a jumble, like it's really easy to accidentally just justify something you made up, right?
Yeah.
So not that having access to all the tools is a problem. The more tools you have, the more problems you could address. But dialing in your sensibility through practice, through integrating this all deeper and deeper into the system, is going to really work most effectively if you're very much challenging your own tendency to inner bias, tendency to interpret things one way versus another, or tendency to see things as associated that might just not be. Like, everything is connected, and so any place in the body might impact any other place. That'll always be there for you, but you're not going to get that like guaranteed result of like, this trigger point always resolves this like respiratory illness or whatever, you know? And we have to stay flexible with that. How do you feel? Where are we at?
Good.
Any questions?
Well, it's interesting that that our personal biases have to be, we got to put a clamp on them.
Uh-huh.
So that we're not superimposing our own prejudices on the person. Everybody's different.
Yeah.
The person on our table is a unique set of cells and structures, and we can't just, this always means that.
Right.
We have to constantly question ourselves.
That's a super good point to bring it to the person in front of us, especially, that like our biases will get us in trouble when we run our mouths in a professional setting or whatever, and like that can be problematic. We might write something that's like a little wobbly on reality referencing, but especially when our biases are in conflict with our clients' needs, it will become problematic very quickly. And we do have a lot of influence. We have all that like transference kind of potentiality and this like sense of authority that's embedded just from the experience. Like, whether or not they know anything about our background and training, when a client comes into our room, and it's our room, and we created the sensory environment, and we're like dressed professionally, and we're pulled together, and we tell them what to do. When their body accepts instructions from us that like is activating a neurological system of dependence, and it's like turning on platforms that they built as small children, and that relationship is super impactful whether or not we know what we're doing with it.
They're so vulnerable at that point.
Exactly.
You can influence them in so many ways.
Yeah.
If you're not ethical and
Right.
grounded in your practice.
Ethical and grounded in your practice. I really like that. Have you guys, let's kind of just chit chat a little bit about like your experiences getting massage. Anybody ever have one of those moments where there's something like distracting and uncomfortable? You're on the table and you're like, do I say something? Do I not say something? Should I say it? It'll probably be fine. They're gonna stop soon. There's probably only 3 minutes left on this massage anyway. You know what I'm talking about?
I do.
Tell me about those.
I was on the table. A woman comes to my mom's house, and my mom totally believes in this. Jen, I think is her name. And she set up her table, started getting a massage. She put on some music, Pandora, with the commercials. Can you believe that? And
My jaw is dropped.
I just let it
Mandible.
happen. I didn't say anything. I didn't
Wow.
say anything. I was in such a state of surrendering to this person and not wanting to offend and not wanting to whatever that I didn't say, not even afterwards. So yeah, I totally
not wanting to offend.
Not, you know, you don't want to interfere with her process or whatever her thing was. And I was not assertive, and I was not.
Right.
You know, come on. My mom spent $100 on this massage, so get an account.
Right? Oh my gosh. Yeah, I love that. That's a great story. Because that's like such an easy, crisp one. Like some of the stories, it's like kind of hard to get across what it was. It's like my elbow was positioned slightly wrong and I was too scared to move it or whatever. I've heard stuff like that, you know? But like that's just like an outright like, what are you doing? Like that's such a sensory disruption to have commercials playing in the background. Like I don't want to go into that like very open theta cognitive state and have subconscious messaging from advertisers blasted at me. Ew. Ew. Yeah. So in that one, like that highlights that vulnerability that we have as clients, as recipients of bodywork, and how that's quite desirable actually. Like it's desirable to the recipient, to the client, to be able to check out and to like not have to do the work of cognitive filtering so that they can really be dealing with their inner world, you know? And so like coming up out of that, we get a sense of resistance, right? Where we're like, we don't want to disturb our own state and we don't want to disturb the practitioner's state. And you can find like an infinite amount of memes being like, stand up for yourself and like, it's your job and your responsibility to like have a voice. And like, yeah, that's true. But in the treatment room, we don't want to leave that responsibility on the clients. Like if possible, we're a couple steps ahead of them, right? Okay.
When I was getting my Reiki session done a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
I was
Reiki session.
It was great. But what made it so great after the first half was that I initially made a dumb mistake of asking the bolster to be under my ankles, and I was supine. Doesn't make sense. I don't need that. I need it under my knees. And so
But you asked for it specifically?
It was just like a little tiny awkward moment of like, do you want a bolster? And I was like, I want it, yes, under my ankles. She's like, okay.
Okay. All
Like
right.
a moment like we're in the office
She's
or
gonna let it
something.
happen.
So we
Right.
talked at the same time. I was like, we're on the same page, right?
Yeah, confusion happened. Your system was like, I would rather accept this than
Yes.
just keep trying to fix it.
Anything but
All right.
to keep talking. I just want Reiki, so I'm here. And but it was uncomfortable.
Right. So then your whole Reiki session is like your hamstrings crossing the knees, or like, what are we doing right now?
Floating towards my thighs. I don't want it. And then
I don't want it.
But I was like, could I just like kick it down? She's probably like relaxed and she won't notice. And I was actually like working myself into a tizzy over it.
Yeah.
In my head. Because I was like, she has a this expectation that by the end I'm going to be mystified, and I was making this whole story up in my head about this woman and how what she wanted me to react at the end of the session, and I wanted to like, she's like 87 years old. I'm making this into a whole story. It's like,
no, it's good. We gotta work these things out, you know.
I can't let her down. She's 87. So then I finally was just like, Eva, what are you doing? I was like, do you mind moving the bolster from my ankles to my knees? And she was like, oh, what? Oh, yeah, of course. And then she moved it, and it was totally fine and gentle and like really nice. And it was actually comforting to hear her voice when she was in a relaxed state working on me. And then that helped me like just kind of process through some like resistance about that in my head.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I was actually able to speak because I have this like expression thing, like tenseness and like.
Oh yeah, the throat chakra hang-ups.
Yeah.
Oh, I know about that.
During the session, and so like that was an example of like getting, because I've had massages when I was like a teenager, where I was taken to like very odd massage, like just very.
A very odd massage. I'm sorry.
It was like my mom took me there because she thought I was having like emotional problems, anger issues, which I was, but they were just, my mom was in the room with the massage therapist, which was her friend, and they were reading like from a book, the different like plexes.
Okay.
And not even like touching me. And it was very intrusive and very weird.
That sounds like not a massage.
Yeah, she was an acupuncturist. I got acupuncture from her later, and it was great. But it was like, I just didn't know that that wasn't a massage until much later.
Okay.
So
yes,
that's a bit of my origin
and I love
story.
that you're representing that, because like this is okay, like right now I think we might be pushing into like, I don't know, 4 or 5% or something, but like of the general population that has consumed professional massage therapy in any like meaningful way.
4 to 5%.
Yes,
only?
it's a very small slice of the demographic of like overall what's out there. And like those other, you know, like everybody's getting squished around a little bit or getting a foot massage during a pedicure or whatever. But like the amount of people carrying experiences of profound disinformation about what we do is really spectacular. So like you being able to identify with that and understand where they're coming from when they're like, I didn't even know it didn't count as a massage when they talked at me instead of touching me. Like, you know, it's actually very normalizing.
Every experience like that in the book before knowing what it, like the tapping on your face.
Oh yeah.
Like that kind of therapy, which can be great, but just in that
EFT stuff.
State, you're just like, why am I being taken here and people are tapping on my face, like other people are doing it on me. And it like, going to get a massage, and it wasn't under that controlled environment, like coercive environment. Is the biggest difference in the world.
What I want to know a little bit is about like inside of that experience for you, knowing what you know now, and like with this kind of evolving sense of experience and like your practice is developing. You've begun your practice, you're practicing on each other, so with what you have now compared to then, do you think you were putting off in those environments any signals that you as a practitioner now would have been able to use?
Well, saying, okay, in the environment, from the therapist's perspective, like I know what I said as the person who didn't want to go to it in the first place, but from like therapist perspective, one of the problems was that I wasn't being asked any questions.
Okay.
So all of my answer, like from the beginning, I wasn't asked any questions. I don't think they said anything. I think they just started and were like, this is going to help.
So we have some critique on the intake process that you experienced.
The intake process, I was pretty like tense table. Just trying to figure out what the heck
Okay,
we're doing.
like if Karen got on the table
Yeah.
and you were about to work on her, and she was like comfortable understanding what was going on.
Yeah.
Right now, do you feel like you would be able to perceive the difference between that and like if she was like cognitively spun up and kind of freaking out about what you were about to
Yeah,
do?
I think I could.
Yeah, like you'd be able to pick that up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'd be harder after doing like many massages on other people because you're getting like you have to figure out when to end that energetic connection with someone else
Yeah.
and not project their comfort onto the next person. But I think if Karen or Yuko was on the table and they were like this, we've set up cues for each other in a way to like check in. Or just like I'm gonna put this bolster under your knees, okay? And
Right.
then if they pick up on my tone, this is kind of like under the magic or whatever, dispersing it. But
Yes, this is under the magic.
Under the
Let us be
magic.
under the magic.
If you ASIO some like, bolsters under their knees, I think hearing someone pick up on your tone of voice when you say da 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 da, okay?
Right,
You're like, okay.
right.
Like, okay, that was a complete sentence. That was a complete thought. I feel like we're on the same page now. If you're like, okay, and they're like, yep, oh, okay. You're like, okay, that was not a complete thought.
Right,
That didn't-
right. You get the feeling of that person's not actually fully with me.
Yeah.
Like we're not in an energetic synchrony.
Yeah.
We're not really like empathetically
Yeah.
linked. And isn't that unsettling, right? That if you get a feed from a practitioner that you're like, they're not actually paying attention to
Yeah.
me, to like me as a person. So that really highlights the value of like what we really have to offer. Like all the touching, all the myofascial, all this stuff is like really wonderful. But it is subservient to the attention, to the consciousness and the awareness and the like knowing and seeing and registering and feeding back with somebody where they get the experience of actually being connected to somebody, but it being like directionally about them for a time. How rare is that in our lives, right? Yeah, I love all that.
Having little cues too, like the muscle pants I wear, my
Yeah.
muscle leggings. If someone, first thing they say when they see me is, "What are your pants?" I'm like, okay, I'm already engaged with that person. And if I say something that leads them to think that I know something about muscle structure, then I can get them to ask more questions, and it's kind of like a little hack to.
Yeah.
But if they don't say anything,
A conversation starter.
yeah, conversation starter. If they don't say anything, then I'm like, okay, then maybe they initially think I'm just kind of silly, like kind of goofy, like I'm just this young girl who likes to, like.
Sure, why
be in
not?
Hawaii doing
Wearing muscle pants.
Like, oh, kids these days, you probably got those off Amazon, whatever. It's like dismissive. Then I'm like, okay, this might not be my kind of client, one, or I just have to work a little bit harder to engage with them and
Sure.
make them comfortable around me.
Sure. Gives you a signal about like maybe what level of awareness, what processing direction they're taking in that interaction.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. We are coming up on an hour of having been in session, so let's go ahead and take a pause. When we come back, we will cruise through a little bit more specifically some of these, like how do we drop the research and the like scientific study informed information into our practice without like losing the magic. Okay. All right. See you soon.